Good morning or good evening, depending on when you're watching this. Welcome to the 2021 Oklahoma Library Association Virtual Conference. My name is Bridget Scheffler, and I'll be hosting today's virtual session on OER and lifelong learning. If you'll all introduce yourselves, we'll get started.
Yeah, hi, I am Caitlin Kelly. I am the Graduate Research Associate at Oklahoma State University, working in the libraries, looking at the impact of OER on lifelong learning.
Hello, my name is Bimisala Ali. I'm a master's student at East Central University, currently working on the research on the efficacy of OER in lifelong learning.
And I'm Marla. I'm the Public Services Librarian at East Central University.
I'm Sharon Riley, and I'm the Director of the Learning Resources Center at Redlands Community College.
And we have another partner that's not with us today. Her name is Kathy Esmiller, and she is the Open Educational Resources Librarian at Oklahoma State University. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about our project and how we got funded through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. But first we need to make sure everyone's on the same page about what is OER. So OER stands for Open Educational Resources. And these are resources that are freely available online, but it doesn't include every learning resource that's available online. It only includes those resources that are openly licensed. And that means that they have a special license applied to them by the creators that lays on top of copyright and gives users upfront permissions. So whereas copyright says all rights are reserved, an open license says some rights are reserved. So for example, some of these resources you can reuse, you can like clone them and reuse them in their entirety. You can make changes. Some of them you can reuse only for non-commercial purposes, or there's other elements to those licenses as well. But if you would like to learn more, there is a webpage there that is from an Oklahoma group that really explains OER very well. And then a description of our project. We were funded in September of 2020 through the Institute of Museum and Library Services to complete a 3-year research project to develop a toolkit on how OER can affect students' development of lifelong learning competencies. And we will be discussing today kind of the rationale behind the project and what we have found so far.
Yeah, so as part of this project, we have some various goals that we are hoping to accomplish within the time allotted to us. So the first being developing a research toolkit. As you'll learn later, we have really been looking at what is available to researchers currently and find that there is a lack of research tools available, so really putting that together. Additionally, increasing the number of robust academic studies, and again, working off that toolkit so that there are scales available to use when you're trying to put together an academic study looking at OER and lifelong learning. Increasing the diversity of the population studied. As you see, we are representing multiple institutions across the state of Oklahoma with multiple different diverse audiences and populations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And then finally, our project goal is to produce a research methodology OER for librarians specifically so that they can use it in their work. This project came out of kind of looking at a need that was left behind in the literature. So really relying on that Hilton 2019 review that looked at OER across different in different uses, but found that it is typically limited to formal education settings and that academic variables are what it's being compared against. So things like GPA, final grades, even pre-test, post-test types of scenarios. So really looking at how can we take it out of only those formal education settings. And that's where lifelong learning came in, of how can we use OERs to produce or to enhance lifelong learning in other situations. Additional need for the project showed that librarian research methodology training could be helpful, and that goes back to that toolkit of what we're hoping to provide.
So I'm excited to represent community colleges as part of this grant because we have a unique, diverse student population Here at Redlands, 63% of our students are racially or ethnically in the minority. We also have 78% of our students are part-time students, so we're a very non-traditional student-centered school. Also, community college employees wear so many hats that they may not have been able to take part in OER research without this grant. We only have 31 full-time faculty at Redlands, and almost all of them have second or third duties that they're assigned. Either they're a department head or they're a head of a club or something like that. Even me as the librarian, I am the only librarian here at Redlands. I'm also the esports coach, and I am the operator for the college. So we just have so many hats here. And this grant will be awesome because it gives an incentive to our faculty to look at OERs and to implement them when that's not really something that is part of their tenure track or anything right now. So it gives them a reason to try this out in their classes.
Since we know some of you are public librarians, we wanted to point out the impact that this project can have for public libraries. So after learning about OER, you may want to use some OER in your programming. For example, you may be able to find a book written on a certain hobby or a skill that you want to teach, like coding and computers, or a language that you want to teach, and you can share this resource with your participants, and then they have access to it as long as they have access to the internet. You can also take a resource that you find and change it up if it has an open license that allows you to do that. And so we really just wanted to bring OER, let you know about it if you didn't already. But also with the toolkit that we create, you will have a way to measure if this OER was effective in increasing lifelong learning, which we know public libraries are institutions of lifelong learning. And so instead of having to rely on GPA or final course grades, which you wouldn't have as part of your program, you can use our tool that will be ready in a couple of years to measure the lifelong learning outcome. Also, for you school librarians, you may already be using OER in your school as well. And while our toolkit won't necessarily be validated for younger students, because that's a whole nother process with different expertise, our research model, we are documenting what steps we're taking to produce this toolkit. And so this is a potential research model you could use to create an instrument for K-12 use. We are also doing a literature review on lifelong learning competencies and really trying to consolidate the existing literature and see what are lifelong learning competencies looked at from multiple viewpoints. So we will be sharing what we have found so far in a few moments.
And speaking of outcomes, when it comes to lifelong learning, we are trying to measure the competencies as well as seeing the traits and attributes that we regard to a learner or individual as skills that they should have gained in the process of lifelong learning, starting with self-regulated learning. This refers to a learner's ability to manage and curate their own process of learning and learning materials, deciphering between data and information, and how to make a very solid judgment or a well-rounded based judgment from the learning materials that they have accumulated over time. Following this goes into social learning. Social learning just refers to learning through one's environment as well as the social constructs they are raised in society, how this impacts them as an individual, as a learning, what they pick up in the environment in different ways. Digital literacy follows after this, which refers to how one can navigate information technology, which is very relevant in today's society and has become even more relevant within the last year due to the global pandemic and remote learning. We did view this as very vital in the 21st century, as digital literacy is very important for the advancement of information sharing and knowledge gathering. How an individual is able to utilize digital materials to to decipher which information is relevant to your learning process is a very huge part of lifelong learning competency. Goal setting also refers to an individual's ability to have an action plan towards their learning, as well as what they hope to get out of the learning process in terms of the materials they have on hand, as well as the knowledge they are trying to gather and see what their goal is, how they're able to commit to a strategy or cultivate a strategy in regards to what their learning goal is. Critical thinking also refers to a person's ability to have a very good judgment in terms of learning material that is very relevant to what the topic or the subject matter is. Self-efficacy, lastly, is the ability for individual to be very um, confident in their abilities, in their learning abilities. And so far, this is what we have gotten, and in the future, we'll be able to gather more because as time goes on, we understand that competencies do change with time and events that happens. Following this, we've been able to organize a lifelong learning skill. Lifelong learning skills just refer to how we're able to measure these competencies that we've gathered so far. And as I said earlier on, there are so much more. However, these are parts of the lifelong learning competencies that are very relevant to the project that we're working on. Starting with the program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, this learning skill is utilized to measure how adults are able to navigate the world of informal and formal education and as to how they apply this in their lives. And this doesn't have to do with the academic setting, as adults also engage outside of the academic setting, the professional world, and in their personal life. So this picks up on traits. Effective lifelong learning skills is the second one on the skills list, as this is one of the skills that we are also using to measure the efficacy of lifelong learning. This is just accumulation of the generic lifelong learning traits that we're familiar with. So much of what I had stated earlier on in the lifelong learning competencies list is on this scale, and it is widely used and very common for researchers that are trying to research elements of lifelong learning to use this to measure how much an individual has gained competence-wise. Third on the list is lifelong learning tendency skills. This is very similar to the effective lifelong learning skill, as I've explained earlier on. This is supposed to pick up on an individual's traits to see how much capacity or potential they will have to accumulate a certain kind of learning ability or layers in the skills now and in the future. Lifelong learning competency skills is also similar to the effective lifelong learning skills. This is supposed to measure which kind of traits are relevant to an individual. And I think this also spans across all ages. It's not just used for one demographic or age, because lifelong learning, as it is stated in the name, is something that happens throughout life. So this is also quite common. And these are the questions that we are exploring in our research. We are exploring how can our toolkit include concepts of lifelong learning that are relevant to different cultures in the US and globally. We are trying to expand past the horizons and see how other people have implemented lifelong learning in their educational institution, both informal and formally. As from our research and understanding, we've seen that numerous countries, especially parts of Europe, are actually very ahead in the OER department. And it's interesting to see how well efficient this has been used. And so to see from that point of view is very relevant to this research as well. We are trying to be very inclusive of other people's perspective, as we do understand that having a diverse point of view is important in making this research as palatable to as many people as possible. What student and teacher variables might we need to control for in our toolkit? This is another very important question. So far, we have reached the student and teacher variables portion of our research, and we've picked up on several commonalities that are quite necessary, but at the same time, some are not so relevant. So those kind of discoveries are also very necessary for our research toolkit, as things might be consistent at the same time. Some things might not be very consistent.
Okay, so now we would love to hear from you. Even though this is a virtual session, we would still like to have your participation. We have a QR code for a Google Doc here on the slide, and that Google Doc has a couple of questions on it. What applications of OER do you see at your library? And how does a lifelong learning focus help connect OER to your library's mission and vision? So we know all libraries are concerned about lifelong learning. So how can we use that as the bridge between OER and your library's mission and vision? So please follow that link to the Google Doc and leave us a few comments. And then finally, we wanted to leave you with a few resources. We have a handout describing the grant application process and kind of how we got here. And that handout is written as a recipe, just because if I wrote a full narrative of how we got here, no one would want to read it. It would be way too long. But I'm always happy to answer questions if you would like to know how the process with IMLS worked. You can also use the QR code for the handout to access that. We also have QR codes for our Twitter, our project Twitter site. There will be occasions when we need feedback from experts in the field and practitioners. So we will post those opportunities on Twitter and also on our Moodle site. The Moodle site is, you can visit it without an account. You can also make an account and then participate on the site. So we will leave any feedback opportunities and also post updates on those two sites. And we would just like to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for funding this project, and give you the grant number in case you want to look up our official information and learn more. And as always, you're welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions. My email address is mlobley, L-O-B as in boy, L-E-Y, @ecok.edu, and I would be happy to talk with you. So thank you for coming to our session, and we look forward to hearing from you on the Google Doc.
Thank you all so much, and thank you everyone at home for tuning in. We hope you learned something, and we hope you enjoy the annual conference. Thank you.